Hello, and welcome to Nature Connects, the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts' webinar series that connects you with scientists, experts, influencers, and our partners from New England and around the world. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Steve Long, the Director of Government Relations for the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts, and your host. We have an exciting program for you today. We're going to learn best practices for reaching out to and engaging your elected officials. We'll hear from Steve Kulik, a retired state legislator, and Emily Myron, the policy manager for the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts, about how to build strong relationships with your elected officials with a goal of both supporting on-the-ground projects in your community and influencing policy decisions. You'll leave the webinar with a clear toolkit for how to engage with your legislators, how to turn your local story into a compelling message, and how to build long-lasting relationships. But before we dive into today's program, I wanted to share a little bit about our guests. Steve Kulik and I've been connected and collaborating for almost 30 years when he was a state rep and I was a legislative aide in the Senate. He served as a state rep for the 1st Franklin District in the Massachusetts House for 13 terms from 1993 until his retirement in 2019. And during his time in the legislature, Steve focused on issues of special concern to rural areas, including education, transportation, broadband technology, health and human services, municipal government, and the environment. He founded the Legislative Rural Caucus and led many successful initiatives. And Steve and TNC have collaborated on legislation and funding for endangered species, land conservation, renewable energy, and rural forests. He had a really key leadership position as the vice chair of the House Budget Committee. And luckily for us, he's a trustee for the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts, where he's active on policy and advocacy work on behalf of environmental and climate issues for the state and region. And now Emily Myron, she's the policy manager for the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts. She works with state and federal legislators, agencies, and partners to advance land and water conservation and climate funding and policy. She leads efforts to increase the conservation land tax credit, excuse me, create policy and funding and programs to advance natural climate solutions, and to bring land and water conservation fund dollars to Massachusetts. She holds a master's in environmental management in ecosystem science and conservation from Duke University, and she also has a bachelor's in biology from St. Mary's College in Maryland. I feel honored to work with these two top-notch professionals who are so effective at what they do. And a note for the audience, as you think of questions for the three of us, please pop them in the Q&A. We will be monitoring the questions, we'll combine similar ones, and you will get to ask these experts what they think about policy and how you can be more effective. So thanks again for joining us today. Let's dive in and move on to the slide deck. So I'm going to cover the first 2 slides, and then you'll hear from Steve and Emily. So you can see some of the framing that we have relative to our approach to policy. And really, we're aiming for systemic change. We want nature to be on the menu. We develop the science, we apply it in the field, and we replicate our successes with levers such as policy. It's a great ripple effect that policy can provide. We have a vision for a world in which people and nature thrive, and that's grounded in our science. And we take a collaborative and non-confrontational approach. We like to say that our hair does not catch on fire. We are influencers. We have credibility and we have strong connections and relationships with policymakers. So we can help focus on getting to yes with our science-based and non-confrontational approach. And we have an amazing Nature Conservancy network. Because of that ripple effect, things that we're doing at the local scale can then be replicated at the state, national, and global scale. And because of our global and national network, our work in Massachusetts can be informed by our experts on climate change, water resources, and land. I can't cite the number of examples where this network has really provided benefits for Massachusetts. So on to the next slide. Why is policy important? It's really just one of the levers we use. It's not the only lever we use. And it's really just about arrows in the quiver and putting more wood behind those arrows. And we strategically choose from all of the policy components you can see here. Sometimes we use them solo, and sometimes we combine them together. And it really helps us target where we can get the most bang for the buck. But really, today's webinar is about an essential ingredient in our policy work. It's about you. It's about constituents. I like to think of constituents as the yeast that makes the bread rise. So, Emily, I'm going to pass it off to you and Steve to talk about how constituents can be influential. Thank you for joining us today. And remember the Q&A.
Thanks, Steve. And thank you all for joining us today. I assume you're here because you already think that having a relationship with your elected official is important. But if there's any lingering doubt, I'd like to start presentations like this with this graph. Congressional staff were asked, what influences a member who's undecided on an issue? At the bottom here, visits from lobbyists, that's me. At the top is visits from constituents, that's you. Almost 50% of offices thought that your visit could meaningfully influence a legislator's decision, and that's huge. Your voices really matter. Next slide. So today we'll be focusing on state level engagement, but everything that we talk about is relevant at the federal and local levels as well. So knowing and engaging with your legislators at each of these levels is important, as action at the local level often influences action at the state level, which then influences action at the federal level. Remember, your elected officials represent you and your community, and they want to hear from you. So after this presentation, we hope that you'll feel inspired and empowered to start building those relationships. Next, please. The ways in which you can engage with your elected officials really range on a continuum. I often have people ask me whether a call or an email really makes a difference, and it does. It might be only 5 minutes out of your day, but hearing from a number of constituents on a particular issue flags that issue for legislators and can lead to action. You also might want to meet, either virtually or in person. Legislators hold district office hours that you can attend, or you can set up separate meetings or introduce yourself at an event. When requesting meetings, if the member themselves can't meet with you, it's still really worthwhile to meet with staff. They're critical members of the team, often are from your community, and will carry your message to their legislator. If there's a specific bill you're passionate about, you can provide written or verbal testimony on it. And this is really important because a legislator really takes note if a citizen takes time out of their day to research a topic, connect with an organization, write a letter, or show up to speak about a bill. And it really makes a big impression. And if there's a specific issue that you're passionate about, you can invite your elected official on a site visit to hear from you and members of your community about it. Maybe there's a road that floods during major storms. You can invite your legislator to come see it and then talk about options for improving resilience. And finally, you might find that your interests and your legislator's experiences really align, and that you may want to come together and work together on issues that you're both passionate about. Next. I know for many, any of these levels of engagement might be daunting. And you might want to take action, but you don't know where to start or what may already be going on related to an issue that you care about. But fortunately, here in Massachusetts, we have a really robust nonprofit community engaged in policy discussions. You can connect with a local organization like a nonprofit or land trust, or a statewide organization like the Nature Conservancy, many of which are also in alliances and coalitions. So for example, if you care about local land conservation, you might join your local land trust, which is then part of the Massachusetts Land Trust Coalition, which then represents the land trust community in a number of coalitions working on land conservation funding and policy. And connecting with organizations or coalitions can help you plug into an organized strategy around an issue. They'll tell you the right time to reach out, provide talking points, templates for letters, and coaching on how to talk about the issues at hand. And some alliances, like the Massachusetts Rivers Alliance, also have lobby days, which are a great way to meet your legislators as well as to meet like-minded neighbors. And in turn, you bring something valuable to those organizations and coalitions. You bring the local story. As a policy professional, I can talk about an issue and about the science and about the data, but it's your local stories that really make the issue come to life for elected officials. They want to know how something touches down in their district, and no one is a better messenger for that than you are. Sometimes, oh, sorry, back one more. Thanks, almost there. And sometimes as a constituent, you also have access to legislators in a way that an organization might not. So for example, I've been working on a statewide conservation land tax credit for years, but it wasn't until I brought in a local land trust partner that I was able to actually meet with the state Senate president herself about the issue. And another example is when we were working on the new climate law, we brought the chair of our board to a meeting with his state senator, who then started sending him updates about the process, which he was then able to share with us. And finally, there's interplay between local groups, statewide groups, and coalitions. So by connecting with one of these groups, your perspective can be shared throughout a broader network and ensure that our state level solutions solve your local challenges. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Steve Kulik, who can speak to this firsthand. Over to you, Steve.
Thanks very much, Emily. It's really a privilege to be on this webinar with you and Steve, having worked with you in my role in the State House. And it's a real pleasure to be able to continue to work with you since I joined the trustees of the Massachusetts chapter of TNC after my retirement. So it's wonderful to keep up that connection. I think Emily covered a lot in a very short amount of time, and I just want to bring some perspective as someone who spent 25 years as a legislator and what I felt was effective in terms of my interactions with my constituents and with advocates on a number of issues, but also my perspective from before my time in the legislature when I was an engaged citizen on a number of issues, including the environment. And I spent 11 years as a member of the select board in my town, so interacted a great deal with my senator and representative on issues of local importance, a number of which were environmental in nature. So I assume that most people on this webinar are here because the environment is top of mind on most of their public issue concerns, and that they're really interested in contacting legislators and talking to policymakers about environmental issues. And one of the nice things about being in Massachusetts is that here at least, can't be said for much of the country or necessarily in Washington, environmental issues are very much nonpartisan or bipartisan in nature. A lot of the big initiatives that I worked on over the years in the House were totally bipartisan. Emily mentioned the conservation land tax credit, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, which was such a great example of both Republicans and Democrats working together for a common interest. And you know, political divisions did not play a part in this. So Emily talked about the not being afraid to get engaged with your legislator, and that's important. Don't feel intimidated by the title or the position. They're there to represent you, and a big part of their ability to do that is to have regular contact, input, receive advice, and receive support, and to be educated by constituents, because generally, most legislators are not experts in more than one or two subjects. By nature of the job, you have to be a generalist. You cover hundreds of issues every year, vote on hundreds of bills. You look to your colleagues who may have expertise in a particular issue like transportation or municipal finance, education, and so forth. But environment is something that touches everyone's district, everyone's interests. And so if you approach your legislator with an interest in an environmental issue, whether it's a budgetary one that happens in the budget every year or in a capital bond bill, environmental bond bills are done every several years, or whether it's a piece of legislation that affects policy, they're going to want to hear from you because they're going to want to know how that affects you on the ground in your community. So those important stories to tell. And as Emily said, you don't have to go it alone. Legislators are very happy to hear from individuals, whether you're representing just yourself and your own interests or you're part of an organization. And that organization could be a neighborhood group, could be just a group of folks in your town, or it could be a membership in coordination with one of our great environmental organizations in Massachusetts, such as the Nature Conservancy. And it's membership and connection with those organizations that can often give you the very best kind of information and talking points to deliver a consistent message, a consistent set of resources and information to a legislator so they can be informed to make good decisions in committees and in votes on the floor and in advocating for your position amongst their colleagues. So accurate information is really important for legislators because they get bombarded with all kinds of different things, perspectives. And as Emily said, I'd love that slide at the beginning about what congressional folks think is the most effective way to reach legislators and to make an impression. And the visits from lobbyists rank low on that. Visits from constituents rank very high. So you're a valuable resource to those folks who represent you. And it's about building trust and establishing a personal relationship and a partnership and getting to know your legislator, not just on a single issue perhaps, but on a number of related environmental issues. It's important to attend events to get to know them, to build that sort of relationship. Most legislators have district office hours. I know that COVID has interrupted that pattern for many, but I noticed that many of them have had Zoom meetings and done it virtually, even during the pandemic. But many are now starting to reinstitute regular office hours at town halls and libraries and schools. And even if you don't have a particular interest at the moment, a particular bill you're concerned about, go and show up at those meetings and just listen. And perhaps offer a comment or two to your legislator and introduce yourself. Make a connection so that they begin to see you as a familiar face. They may begin to identify you with a particular set of issues and concerns that you want to be a resource to them for. They will appreciate that. After all, they're in the people business. And as I said earlier, they can't do this job without you. First, you have to elect them, and then you have to keep them well informed and to some extent also hold their feet to the fire to try to represent you as effectively as possible. So attending events is important. Very often you can invite legislators to attend events, which is a great way to establish that connection. If you have a neighborhood committee or a town energy committee or climate committee or something, invite your state representative or senator to join you once a year or however often you think it's appropriate to participate in the discussion and hear what's important to you and to your community. The other thing that exists now that didn't exist when I first entered the legislature that I think is important is being able to follow your legislator on social media and to connect with them that way. And if you like what they're doing, you can broadcast their social media. That's good. Thanks for advancing that slide. And be able to share that with your own networks, who can then also become influencers to that legislator. It's also important, I think, to understand besides the mutual benefits of those relationships, to understand some of the limitations that an individual legislator has and to understand the legislative process, which is filled with many, many twists and turns and many great ideas, which seem, very simple. This should be a no-brainer. This should be able to pass the legislature very easily. Can take a long and winding road over quite a long time. I think the conservation land tax credit was a good example of that a decade ago. It took a while, it took a bit of education, but it's well established now with more to go, which Emily's been working on very effectively. So understand those limitations that a legislator has, that sometimes they just aren't going to be able to do something immediately. And the conservation land tax credit, for example, when it was established, we were working on it around 2010 and coming out of a recession. And this was a tax expenditure for a tax credit, which we didn't feel we could afford right then in the middle of a recession, with having to rely on our rainy day fund to even fund the budget. So we adopted it, but we put it off for a year and delayed its implementation. So we got what we wanted. We had to compromise on the timeline. And those types of compromises are very often what the practical impact that has to happen in order to realize your larger goal. So understand and be sensitive, I think, to some of the limitations of legislative process, if you will. And your legislator may be advocating for you very, very strongly and for your issues, but there's sometimes a limit, and compromises are going to have to be made. I also wanted to touch base with, reinforce what Emily said about working with legislative staff. Building that relationship of trust and partnership with the legislator so they know who you are, they know what you care about, is important. But it can be just as important to do that with staff. I think that people very often think that the staff don't necessarily pass on to the legislator what you talk to them about, but they do. It's a team effort within the legislature, and very often the staff can get you information more quickly than just dealing with the legislator. They will convey your thoughts and your concerns and your suggestions to that legislator, and are very often a really effective go-between between constituents and the elected official. I wanted to say a word about local government as well, because these same issues apply at working with a local mayor, city council, select board. The same building of trust and relationship that I talked about with legislators should happen at the local level as well, because what I've seen over the years is many important local officials, environmental issues start at the local level, and it might be an issue of protecting some land, working with a land trust or a landowner. It may be protecting a natural resource that starts at the local level with a conservation commission or an energy commission or planning board or something. And it's important to connect with them and to build those same kinds of trusts and relationships that you have with a legislator. And I want to encourage people to try to engage and maybe serve in local government. I know I represent mostly small towns. I live in a very small town, which depends on volunteer government, basically. And they're always looking for folks to serve on a conservation commission or a riverways advisory committee or what have you. So that's a great way for you to get involved and also enhance your effectiveness and your connection with your legislators if you hold some sort of a local position like that and can speak on behalf of the community. So that advocacy is important, but I want to end this slide and turn it back to Emily by reminding you that when you're working with an elected official at the state, federal, or local level, always say thank you, whether you're not you completely are in agreement on something, but the thank you is important. And if you really do support what a legislator is doing, it can be very helpful to them in their work and their effectiveness to share that thanks with a letter to the editor or posting on your own social media or telling other people what your experience with the legislator has been. And so I'm going to turn it back to Emily, and I'm going to look forward to your questions a little bit later on. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much, Steve. It was, an absolute pleasure working with you during your time as a legislator, and we're so lucky to have you on our board. Thank you for sharing your perspective and advice here. It's so great to be able to hear it firsthand from someone who has, the depth of experience that you do. I want to take what Steve has just shared now and distill it into some actionable best practices so that you can leave today having some really clear, okay, here's what I can do to get started. So the first thing you need to do is take that step of reaching out and getting a meeting with your elected official. As Steve said, you don't need to have an ask right now. You don't need to know exactly what the end goal is. It's just great to introduce yourself, get to know each other, and hear about one of your areas of interest. And in fact, it's better to have a relationship before you have an ask, because really so much is based on trust. First, you would want to reach out to an office to request a meeting or to inquire about their office hours. And again, as Steve and I both said, if the member can't meet with you personally, it's still really always worthwhile to meet with staff. When you do meet, make sure to share a bit about yourself, who you are, where you work, maybe where you live, any local groups that you're a part of, why this is a community that you care about. And then as Steve said, thank them. Thank them for representing you and for any action that they may have taken on issues that you care about. If you have time, it's always good to maybe do a little bit of research in advance so you know where your legislator stands on an issue. Maybe they're already a leader in it, or maybe it's something where there's an opportunity for them to learn more and get more involved. Then it's just having a conversation. Your elected officials care about you and your community. They want to hear about the park that you want built, the sewage you're concerned about, or the farmer's market that you love. If there's a particular issue or bill that you want to talk about, go for it, but don't feel like you need to be a policy expert. You're an expert on your experience and your community. You can make an ask, like co-sponsoring a bill if you have one, or you can also ask that maybe they look into bills related to a topic that you're interested in, or look for opportunities to work together moving forward. And afterwards, send them an email or a note thanking them for their time, reiterating your story or ask, and providing your contact information. You want to have sort of that basis so that they can go back and see that when you reach out again in the future. Next slide. The ultimate goal is really to build a strong long-term reciprocal relationship. Oh, again, starts with getting to know your legislators. Talk to candidates when they're running for office, attend local office hours or a lobby day. It's never too early or too late to start building the relationship. And again, share your personal experience, why you care about an issue and how it affects your family or your community. Then once you've done that, start looking for opportunities to have consistent interactions. So that could be attending local events that they may be also attending, going to some of those office hours, or even sharing interesting news articles with them that you think they might be interested in. Maybe you'll check in via email periodically on an issue that you both care about, things like that. You can also invite your elected officials to site visits or events, which also Steve touched on a little bit. And those site visits in particular can be really powerful. The top picture here on the slide is Steve Long here took the former Speaker of the House along with members of their community out to see a living shoreline in his district when we were pushing for the addition of green infrastructure language into his climate bond bill. And of course, we can't say, with 100% certainty that it was because of the visit, but shortly after the visit, the language we had been advocating for was included in the bill. And so legislators, they want to see how the work that they're doing in the State House touches down in their district. They want to meet with constituents and they want to be inspired. They want to know why this matters to the folks that they're representing. And then again, we keep saying this, can't stress it enough, but if your legislators take action on your priorities, thank them. Back them up, be a cheerleader, tell your friends. It really is important that if they're stepping up for you, that they know that you see them and that you're behind them. You can use media to strengthen the relationship as well. It's great to follow them on social media where you can see what they're working on or share posts that they've done, thank them when they do something that take action on an issue that you care about. And you may even want to do a letter to the editor in your local paper about a specific bill or issue. Local press is something that legislators pay a lot of attention to. So it really, that's a really great way to share your story with a broader audience. And then as you get to know your members and build those relationships, you can start thinking about opportunities for leadership. So for example, you might ask them to lead or to co-sponsor a bill on a topic that you care about, or advocate for a budgetary earmark related to something in your community. And then if you have time, you can even look into opportunities to volunteer with your member to maybe do research into topics or to organize community conversations around specific issues. Next, please. And then, of course, all those best practices apply for your local and federal elected officials as well. So this photo here is, we were able to meet with Congresswoman Trahan right after the beginning of her first term in Congress, because the chair of our board is a constituent of hers. So we were able to get a meeting right away, and we've had a close working relationship with her office ever since. So again, it really can open doors and make a big difference. Well, before we move to questions, we're going to close today with 2 short stories from Steve about his time in the legislature, about two stories where constituent action really influenced state policy, and where those local stories he was able to really carry forward to affect change. So pass it back to you, Steve.
Thanks, Emily. Yeah, the 2 examples that we're going to use here are the Conservation Land Tax Credit and more recently the Mohawk Trail Woodlands Partnership. And the Conservation Land Tax Credit, as I mentioned earlier, goes back more than a decade now. It's been a very successful and effective tool in encouraging the donation of conservation lands through the incentive of a tax credit that can be part of that package in the arrangement. And it often involves local land trusts. TNC has been involved in a number of these. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts gets involved and so forth. And one of the things that made it happen a decade ago was citizen involvement, the support. You can see on this slide at the bottom a number of logos of the prominent partners in this effort to pass this legislation. Although I have to say the Nature Conservancy was front and center taking the lead on this. All of our partner non-governmental organizations, great environmental advocates, played a part in this and putting out legislative alerts throughout the process so that legislators, besides those of us who were intimately involved as lead sponsors and trying to bring the message, the importance of passing this tax credit legislation to our colleagues were hearing from their constituents because they got legislative alerts and bulletins as members of these organizations. So please call or write your legislator and ask for them to support this. And that has a ripple effect, because when a legislator who hasn't heard of an issue like this before, they begin to look into it, they're hearing from a constituent, they'll come to me or they'll come to another lead sponsor to learn about it, and very often say, well, that sounds great, you have my support. So it's all part of that educational effort, and it comes from building relationships between individuals acting as members of organizations or as individual citizens concerned about a piece of policy legislation that really move that across the goal line. Even, as I mentioned earlier, when we were coming out of a recession around 2010, we were able to make this significant investment, which continues to this day in a very effective program. The other one I'll mention is the Mohawk Trail Woodlands Partnership, which happened in the last, towards the end of my final term in 2018. And you can see on the map there, the 20 or so communities in Franklin and Berkshire counties, basically northwestern corner of Massachusetts, heavily rural area, much of it my former district, heavily forested area, and an area that those forests provide important resources for carbon sequestration, for tourism, for recreation, also for the forest-based economy, which has suffered greatly in recent years. So the closure of many sawmills that provided locally sourced building materials and so forth. But these communities, it came together first as a grassroots effort with local officials and the 2 regional planning agencies that covered that area, trying to figure out a way to maximize for that region the benefit of our heavily forested lands, both for the environment and for the economy. And to allow people to continue to enjoy this natural resource. And so the partnership went through many local meetings, many regional meetings, buy-in from local communities, and needed vote of support from every select board in every town in the region. That often was encouraged by local environmental advocates. And it took a while to put together, but it did. And with that level of support, legislation was passed to create the partnership, which is today is investing significant resource. They've received a lot of grant support to invest in that resource and look at the best way to maintain our forests and the health of our forests in that part of the state, which will contribute greatly to climate issues as well as the local economy and just the pleasure that people get from enjoying our forests. So another important initiative that had a lot of grassroots support, and I can't stress enough how grassroots efforts are such a part of working with the legislator, because after all, those who step out there and put themselves forward to get elected, that's a grassroots effort as well. So these are all about partnerships and relationships, and those are two examples. So with that, I think we're gonna kick it back to Steve Long to monitor and the question and answer session.
Thank you so much, both of you. That was such a great glide path you provided for constituents to engage with their legislators and elected officials on policy. So really, thank you very much. So we'd like to dive into questions, and just a reminder, at the bottom of your computer screen, you'll see a little Q&A icon. If you click on that, you can type your questions in and we can help facilitate the process here. So I just had a question, Steve, knowing that you've done this work for a while, and remembering my time in the State House back in the early to mid 90s, how have engagements with constituents changed over time?
That's a great question. It's been a dramatic change. When I entered the legislature ages ago now in 1993, there was no email. I did not even have a computer on my desk at that time. The legislature was a very slow adopter of technology at the time. So most of the connections, the contact I had with constituents was through traditional mail. People actually would write a letter and put a stamp on it and mail it to us, or phone calls, or meetings in the district. As I said, legislators should be out and about in their districts on a regular basis, either through office hours or scheduled events, or just being out there. I know I could never go to the grocery store without running into a number of constituents and stopping to chat about, you know, a matter of local importance, or even a bill that's pending on Beacon Hill that they're interested in. So today, of course, we have, I'd say most of the contact happens through email. There's a couple of caveats, and I think that early slide about what's effective in Congress is important to remember. That a couple of the effective bars were personalized emails from constituents, not necessarily the click and send robo emails that are so popular by many organizations. I think that's important. Sometimes when there's a really hot issue that's pending on the floor of the House or Senate, organizations will ask their membership to click here and send a message to the legislator, and they come in by the hundreds. And they have very limited effectiveness, because we as legislators know that it took very little effort to do that. Sometimes it has to be done that way, but if you have an extra 5 minutes to really personalize an email to your legislator and put it in the context of your experience and your community's interests, that is very, very effective. And also, we had no social media often back then, but now that's a big part of every legislator's activities through their websites, through their social media. It's a way they communicate with their constituents. So things have changed a lot, I have to say, all in all, for the better, because I think it is easier today than it was 30 years ago for people to connect with their legislators in a variety of ways.
That's really helpful. It almost seems like there's a ladder of engagement and a ladder of value that legislators apply. Those sort of one-stop shopping postcards versus the ladder of engagement that Emily talked about. Emails, calls, meetings, site visits. So think about it like a card game. Are you gonna throw a deuce or are you gonna throw an ace? So we do have a question about the best way to get in touch with legislators. There was somebody who was trying to make contact and they encountered some frustration.
Well, I'd say certainly a phone call. If the contact was attempted solely through email, again, legislators, by the time I left office 2.5, 3 years ago, my typical daily intake of most was in several hundreds. But I represented 19 communities, so most legislators represent far fewer than that. Mine was just a large spread out rural district of small towns, so lots of different issues. But I think every legislator gets hundreds of emails a day, and they do their best to follow them, to catalog them, to track them, and respond to them. But sometimes things can get lost that way. So I would say phone calling, persistent. If you feel the legislator's avoiding you in some way, I think, try to engage them in the district. If they have office hours, just go to the office hour. Or write a letter to them personally, send it to their home. The home addresses of legislators are pretty easily available. But that's a rare case, I think, for people not to get a response from a legislator. As I say, most people who serve as elected officials know that they depend on their constituents who put them there in office, and they should be responding to them.
Yeah, and I think also Emily, at the end of this webinar, is going to put a link to the legislature's website where you can get phone numbers to contact the legislators. So Steve, those are some great tips. And, I think I just want to emphasize that a point both of you made is that talking with the staff can be equally effective. The staff are really a great conduit to the legislators. And I don't think staff positions or names are available on the legislature's website, but in most legislative offices, you will have a chief of staff. You will have somebody who's on point to help manage the staff and help the legislator manage his or her agenda. And then in some offices, Senate offices in particular, where they have more staff, they'll often have a legislative director who's on point for legislation. They'll have a communications director. They'll have somebody who handles scheduling and constituent services. Those are just some of the positions I can think of, because somebody did ask about different types of positions in legislative offices. And most House members are housed in committees, so it'll be a subject area they're interested in. So those committee staff are researchers and lawyers who help craft the legislation.
Steve, if
go ahead,
I can
Emily.
chime in,
Yeah,
no, I was just going to say, also, if you don't know who to contact, you can ask. So I do this all the time because staff change in offices, especially sometimes the congressional offices have a lot of staff members. I'll call and I'll just ask, who's the point person on environmental issues? And they'll point me in the right direction. So if you aren't sure, or even maybe if you're in touch with one office and you're having a hard time getting in touch with another office, ask that first office, who do you think is the right person for me to contact in so-and-so's office? Just don't be afraid to ask, because someone will help you out.
Perfect. Thank you. That was helpful. So this is a really interesting question. This is a person who's asking about a public employee who wants to advocate for legislation that might impact the agency they work for. And they're concerned about it creating a potential conflict of interest that might violate ethics rules. So I'm wondering, Steve, if you've ever encountered that, or Emily, if you have any thoughts on that.
That is a great question. And I think in terms of protecting the public employee, they need to get an answer from the State Ethics Commission, who provide an advisory opinion on whether or not a state employee who may be connected to this issue, I wasn't sure about that, can advocate for it. I think in general, on their own time, they probably can. And I think that's an important distinction. Just because you're a public employee doesn't mean you don't have opinions and shouldn't be able to share them with your elected officials. But you want to make sure you're doing it on your own time and not using any public resources to do so. And that's probably the advice one would get from the State Ethics Commission. But they're very approachable. You call them up, tell them your problem, they'll give you an answer right away.
That's great. Super, thank you. And here's another interesting question. We have a question from someone who I think is in my Tufts University environmental policy class. Hi, David. He asks, I'm curious how one navigates seeking to build a relationship with legislators as a temporary resident of a state or a district. For example, a college student, are there different attitudes towards engagement with these sorts of constituents?
That's a great question as well. I think sometimes legislators respond, some legislators respond more quickly and maybe more substantively with people who are registered to vote. I know that there have been legislative offices that always check a constituent's voting eligibility before they necessarily get to engage with them on an issue. I never did that. I think most legislators don't, but some do. But I don't think legislators are in a position to dismiss input, advice, suggestions, interest from someone who may be temporarily residing in their district in Massachusetts. I think don't be shy about getting engaged. Again, particularly if you can be a resource and provide information and some educational materials about an issue to a legislator. 9 times out of 10, they're going to appreciate that, whether you're a permanent resident and voting member of their district or not.
And I think especially today's younger generation has such fresh ideas and perspectives that they can really provide a great icebreaker and especially connect to issues that people care about. I mean, people are going to be around for a long time, care about climate change. So here's a good thought. And someone said, gee, you guys didn't mention getting involved in an election campaign or providing financial support to a legislator. And just to be clear, we can't do that as the way we're registered as a nonprofit, as the Nature Conservancy. We don't do candidate endorsements or do contributions to candidates. But I would say, and Steve, you can reflect on this as well, I would say, sure. I think legislators love getting support with campaign workers and funding. And Steve, maybe you could speak to some experience with that.
Sure. We remember those folks who will hand out a sign or organize a coffee hour for us or come to a fundraiser, who appreciate the work you're doing in general, and maybe on a particular issue that's important to that constituent that might motivate them to actually volunteer on a campaign or to contribute to a legislator. You tend to really remember those folks. I remember people who, when I was first running and had no idea if I was going to win that first primary election in 1993, I remember people who sent me $10 that I had never met. It just means something and stays with you. And you're always happy to see that person for the next, however number of years you're in office. So yeah, if you're someone who likes the act of politics, the process of politics, going to strategy meetings, holding a sign, going door to door with your candidate or just in your neighborhood canvassing, making phone calls, sending dear friend postcards about supporting your candidate. That means so much. That is really the extra mile of building that relationship with your legislator or your elected official. And in terms of fundraising and making a financial contribution to a legislator, that means a lot to us. And it doesn't have to be a lot of money. You know, as I said, I remember the first $10 I got. Most legislators have, you know, low dollar contribution events, fundraisers of one kind or another, particularly in election year, although I know they haven't really been doing that much during COVID. But you can donate through their websites or go to an event. You don't have to make a big dollar investment at all. Every little bit helps to contribute. It allows them to do their job. It allows them to get their message out. It allows them to meet more people.
And there are really, really strict laws about how candidates can spend that money too. So don't worry, your money is going in a good place.
Yeah.
So this might be one for both of you. So it's an interesting angle on a question. So it's you know, some issues can get really emotional. How do you handle an emotional constituent? And to what degree you feel you're influenced by emotion versus fact-based information? And I think we're all exposed to that sometimes, whether we're a legislator or an advocate. Emily, do you want to try that one first?
Sure. I mean, I'm honestly, I'm interested to hear what Steve has to say on this one. You know, I think it's a balance, right? Because it's true. A lot of things are emotional and you want to touch someone's heart ultimately. And that's something that influences people. I think, you know, it's that being said, right, there's a fine line between professionality and having a constructive conversation about a topic and sort of, you know, and not. So, I mean, I think when you come in with a personal story about how something affects you or your family, that maybe could count as emotional, I guess, depending on the presentation. But I think that that's important because people remember things that touch them. And in an ideal situation, you know, the policy, it touches your heart and it's backed up by science and facts, right? That's what we are looking for. So I don't know that answers the question per se, but I think, you know, if you're just going to come in and state numbers, I think that probably doesn't have as much of an influence as if you can make that really personal connection about why something matters to you. So I think you sort of need both.
Thank you, Emily.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear what Steve says.
Well, I agree with you. It's a balance. And very often I experienced, you know, both facts and emotion being a part of an advocacy pitch to me, if you will, a meeting on issues. And sometimes emotion, it gets confused, or it's a aspect of passion. So, you know, one of the things that makes the biggest impression on a legislator is if someone feels passionately about an issue. And that may make them get a little bit emotional. And that's fine. It's real. It means that there's a genuineness to what this person is saying to you, how they may want you to vote or support a bill, get behind an issue that's important locally. Yeah, I've experienced a lot of emotion in meetings in my office over the years, most of it very positive. You know, there's, you know, negative emotion that sometimes crops up, and I've also been in some heated disputes or disagreements with constituents over the years who may have wanted me to, you know, act in a particular way that wasn't the way I was headed. You're never going to 100% agree with your legislators, and they're not going to 100% agree with you. And it's important to, though, listen to each other, to hear what each other's saying, and to respect those differences. But I have experience, and I know every legislator has, you know, an angry constituent yelling at them and calling them names. It's part of the territory. It happens. It's not very effective in terms of building relationships, I'll tell you that.
That's great. Thank you both for that answer. That was much richer than I expected. So thank you. So there's one more question, then I'll ask for closing thoughts, and then we have a closing call to action. So the question is, what advice do you have for a high school student who's not of voting age who cares passionately about the environment?
You want to take that first, Emily?
Sure, it's never too early to get involved. I think, honestly, I think that if a high schooler came in and talked to a legislator about something, that would make a huge impact, because that's not a voice that comes in often. And again, when someone takes time, out of their personal life to invest in something, that makes folks take notice. And so I don't think if you're a high schooler who's passionate about something, I don't think that that should hold you back at all. You will be of voting age. You will become a voter. Your parents are voters. You probably have friends who are voters. I can't imagine that someone would write you off just because you're not 18 yet. And as Steve said, I think, having new perspectives is also really valuable and exciting. So go for it. That would be what I'd say.
Someone who's going to have to live with the consequences of environmental decisions for another 60 plus years. So go for it. So I would like to hear very brief final thoughts from both of you, and then go to our call to action. So Steve, do you have some final thoughts you want to offer on constituents and legislators?
Well, I appreciate the opportunity especially to speak with people whose focus is the environment, which is very important to me and was in my time in the legislature, because it is an issue that is so complex, it's so multifaceted, and yet it brings such a diverse constituency together. There are very, very few people who don't care about clean air and clean water and protecting natural resources and the environment that they live in. And so, as I said earlier, it's a nonpartisan, bipartisan type of issue. And so legislators really appreciate hearing the value of that from their constituents, and being a resource, advocating as either an individual, a member of your community, a member of an organization, to a legislator is incredibly effective and important. And it all goes back to building that one-on-one relationship. Try to get them to know who you are. That's not hard to do. There's so many different ways we've talked about in the last hour that you can do that. Build that relationship so they can rely on you as a resource. And I think you'll be able to find a long and valued relationship with elected officials if you do that. Take that effort.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. I have valued our collaboration over the years so much, Stephen. It's great having you on our board, so Emily and I can consult with you periodically. So thank you so much for all of that. Emily, do you have I think we have time to go to the call to action, but do you have like one final last thought for folks?
I second everything that Steve said. I think the only thing I would add is that, folks like me and Steve Long and others in our kind of position are here to help you. So please don't hesitate to reach out. Organizations provide a lot of materials, a lot of guidance, a lot of resources. So, take advantage of those opportunities in your community and with organizations that are working on issues that you care about. And don't be afraid to reach out to the organization too and say, I want to help champion that issue. How can I do that in an effective way? I guarantee you there's somebody on the staff who's going to want to help you do that.
We like being coaches. That's great words of advice, Emily. And let's go to this call to action.
Yeah, absolutely. So hopefully by now, this point in the presentation, you're feeling jazzed and you want to know, what is it? All right, I want to do something right now. What can I do? So right now, the Massachusetts legislature is having conversations about how to spend the about $5 billion that we've received through the American Rescue Plan. So that's federal money that's come to Massachusetts that now our elected officials are trying to decide what to prioritize spending on. The Nature Conservancy has joined with a number of statewide environmental nonprofit organizations to ask that a portion of those funds be spent on increasing outdoor recreation opportunities, on nature-based solutions to help us adapt to climate change and to increase our resiliency to climate change, and then also to improve our drinking water, stormwater, and wastewater infrastructure. So if you are looking for action that you can take now is the perfect time to reach out to your state legislator. And Lauren put that link in the chat earlier, and it's at the bottom of the screen here, to express your support for spending some of the ARPA money on these priorities. It really is important that your legislators are hearing from you on this. Right now is literally the right time because they're having public hearings on a number of topics. And it's a big pot of money and there's a lot of priorities. So our goal is to make sure that the environment is one of those priorities that gets funding through this pot of money. We see these as opportunities to help communities that have been disproportionately impacted by COVID, which in many cases are the same communities that are disproportionately impacted by climate change. This is a way to improve our urban areas, our public health, our climate resiliency. There are just so many benefits to making investments like these, as well as providing and supporting good paying jobs and workforce development opportunities across the Commonwealth. So we hope that you'll take some action in the next week or so and reach out to your legislators and tell them that these are things that you care about and you hope that they'll be investing in.
Super. Thank you so much. And I just want to thank everyone who joined us today. And also thank you for your support of the Nature Conservancy. Your support is what makes all of this work possible. We could not do this without you. We'll be sending everyone a follow-up email over the coming days with links to the resources we talked about, especially that call to action that Emily just called out for. And if you're enjoying these webinars, please share them with your friends. And you can also follow us on social media and look for us on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. And we'll provide you with updates on what's going on and especially the next Nature Connects. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. And I especially want to thank our two guests, Steve and Emily. It's an honor to work with both of you and look forward to more successes in the future and having some energized constituents at the end of the day today. So thanks again, everyone, for joining. Take care.